My name is Hannah, and I'm so grateful that you've chosen to spend your time here with us. I join you on behalf of Jewish Women International, where I'm the Director of Women's Impact and Development. We're especially grateful to be hosting tonight's conversation in partnership with the Artists Against Anti-Semitism, an organization that is doing important work to elevate Jewish voices and use art, storytelling, and culture to confront anti-Semitism and strengthen community. This partnership feels particularly meaningful in this moment. At JWI, we just completed a national survey of young Jewish women that underscored something many of us feel. We are navigating a time of rising anti Semitism and a climate where Jewish voices are isolated, misunderstood, and even silenced. Because of that, spaces like this one matter deeply. They give us the opportunity to come together, to learn, to ask questions, and to engage thoughtfully with ideas and with one another. Moments of conversation, storytelling, and shared reflection are powerful ways we strengthen community and ensure Jewish voices continue to be heard. And that's exactly why this book series exists. Read with JWI and Artists Against Anti-Semitism was created to bring people together around powerful stories and conversations that help us understand the world and ourselves more deeply. Books have always been a way for communities to grapple with difficult moments, to preserve memory, and to imagine what comes next. Tonight is a wonderful example of that. Through this partnership and this conversation, we have the opportunity not only to engage with an important book, Ruptured, but also to connect with one another in a space that centers curiosity, dialogue, and community. So thank you all for being here, for showing up with open minds and open hearts, and for creating a space of thoughtful Jewish community that is so needed right now. And with that, I'm pleased to turn things over to Gili, who will help guide us into tonight's conversation.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I'm overwhelmed by the response, and we're just excited to have this conversation and to launch the Read With program with JWI and Artists Against Anti-Semitism. Artists Against Anti-Semitism was formed in the wake of October 7th as a nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness of anti-Semitism in the arts. As Hannah alluded a moment ago, much the way Jewish women across the country, really across the world, are feeling silenced, are feeling excluded, we have seen firsthand those effects playing out in all spaces across the arts: publishing, media, visual arts. Jewish authors are being excluded. They're being pushed aside. And sometimes that's happening quietly, and sometimes it's happening quite loudly and quite overtly. And together with JWI, we decided that when that happens, our answer to it is to insist on speaking up and showing up. We're going to keep creating our stories. We're going to insist that we have a role in the public space, that our art belongs in the spaces where art is created and shared. And that's why we chose the theme for this year's Read With Artists Against Anti-Semitism and Jewish Women International of Hineni, which translates to Here I Am. More fully, in this moment, here we are. This is a declaration of our presence, of standing in the spaces where our voices are needed, whether we're asked to be there or welcomed to be there or not. This moment is about more than books. It's about resilience, and none of it happens alone. We're incredibly grateful to JWI and the entire community that made this evening and the rest of this series possible. Readers, writers, organizations, collaborators, and of course, you, our participants. So tonight and in all the work we do, here we are, Hineni. We're ready to stand together to ensure that spaces like this exist for our voices to continue being heard. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce our moderator for the evening. Pardon me just one moment. I have to pull up her bio. Um, Erica Dreyfus is a poet and an author herself. She is a member of the Board of Artists Against Anti-Semitism together with me. She is a thoughtful storyteller. She's on the board of the Leo Beck Institute. She is an award-winning, honored Jewish author in and of her own right. And she's a New Yorker, which I'm very jealous of many days. Erica, thank you so much for agreeing to moderate this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. It is just such a pleasure to be here this evening, and I want to echo all of the appreciation that others have already said, appreciation for this collaboration between our two organizations, appreciation for all of you in the audience, appreciation for Park Books. Is that correct? Yes, the bookseller. Very grateful to them, and of course to our guest speakers who I'm going to be introducing in just a moment. I just wanted to preface everything with a few comments about this really, truly important book. If you haven't seen it yet, haven't gotten a copy, it is this book, Ruptured, subtitled Jewish Women in Australia Reflect on Life Post October 7th. And I think that if what we're looking for with this series is to really hear from a great variety of Jewish women, to hear their voices, I think an anthology like this one is just the perfect way to begin, because we get to hear, at least through our co-editors with us today, we get to hear about all of the women who are featured in this book. And I think that it's especially relevant that we, again, are here under the umbrella of Jewish Women International, emphasis on the international with our Australian focus for the evening, and the Artists Against Anti-Semitism, to be talking about this book, which I have actually been following for a long time. I went back into my archive. Some of you may know that I have this habit of sharing calls for submissions and opportunities in the Jewish writing space on my blog. And I saw that I shared the call for submissions for this anthology in August of 2024. So I was there sort of from the beginning, not from the very beginning, as we'll hear from our editors, but kind of from the beginning. And then the book was published in August 2025, and I read it soon thereafter and was telling everybody about it. But then, of course, we all had our our attention drawn to Australia in December of 2025 with the murderous attack on the Jewish celebrants of Hanukkah on Bondi Beach. And at that point, really amplifying this book seemed even more important and urgent. So we'll get to hear a little bit about how the book embodies our series theme of Hineni, and how our collective presence and actions to enact resistance and resilience are again in this book and in this whole series. But I'll just mention that I was rereading the book this week, and I was really struck by how many times the word Hineni comes up in the text from the different contributors. So maybe we'll hear a little bit about that. And then again, about just the timeliness of this. We are really right in the middle of the week between Purim, which we've just celebrated, and International Women's Day, which is March 8th. And when I introduced Lee is in Australia right now. She's already closer to March 8th because it's really March 6th for her already. We're still back March 5th here on the East Coast of the United States where I am. But I was just really struck again by the Esther-like valor of the editors and the contributors as I was reading the book this week. So I just think, again, it's perfect timing. So let me introduce you to these fabulous co-editors. So again, Lee Kaufman is an author and editor of 9 books, including Split, which was longlisted for an Australian Book Industry Award, and Imperfect, which was shortlisted for a NIB Literary Award. Ruptured is the 3rd anthology that Lee has edited or co-edited, and she is also a writing teacher and mentor. So welcome, Lee.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. And co-editor Tamar Paloch trained as an occupational therapist and worked in disability advocacy and community development. October 7th drew her into women-led activism, and she co-founded the International, ALL, Women's Day platform to elevate Jewish women's voices. As a writer, she is interested in themes of motherhood, memory, and grief. So welcome, Tamar.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
It's really great to have you. I thought we might begin with you setting the stage for us, if you will, because I'm not sure how many members of our audience are familiar with the Australian Jewish community. So I was thinking that you might be able to give us maybe a quick introduction to this community and maybe tell us a bit about its diversity as manifested among the contributors to your book, because it struck me that they were a group with lots of different backgrounds and identities within the Australian Jewish mosaic. Is there anything that sort of pops to mind to start telling us about what the Australian Jewish community is like? Either
The
one of
Australian
you.
Jewish community goes back all the way to the first settlement in the 1700s, where there were actually a few Jews on the first fleet. And for the most, until the early 1900s, or maybe late 1800s, early 1900s, it was largely an Anglo community, a very small Anglo community that lived in Australia. And then, as the climate in Europe continued to change, we had waves of immigration. But Australia has, unlike other countries, Australia has always had um, has not had any systemic anti-Semitism per se. There has always been an underbelly of anti-Semitism in Australia, being an Anglo country. Until the 70s, they had the White Australia policy, which made it very prohibitive for people to easily move to Australia. But overall, the Jewish experience, like in terms of migration, has been relatively positive and easy, and also in terms of building community. There's no question that the waves of immigration post Holocaust really bolstered the community's presence in Australia, and certainly something you'll hear from a lot of Australians these days are comments like, "We're grateful that our grandparents aren't here to see what has happened to this place where they sought haven and really were able to build up what seemed like a very bright and positive future for their grandchildren." So for many of us, not all of us, but for many of us, we grew up on the shoulders of giants, really, people who became huge contributors to the um, Australian social fabric, and they really the way that Australia has unraveled these past 2 years has definitely been very upsetting on that front as well, in terms of what was built. Over the years, from the 70s onwards, there were waves of migration from the former Soviet Union and from Israel. There's a very large Israeli population in Australia now, people seeking the peace and the tranquility of the Bondi Beach, really, and the beaches of Australia. It has always really appealed to Israeli citizens. And my mother herself was an Israeli who came to Australia in the 70s. So our community has really been a very strong and vibrant part of the social fabric, which has really accentuated the sense of dislocation that we'll talk about today.
Thank you. Lee, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I can. So I have I was fascinated listening to Tamar, who was born in Australia. So actually, you were born in Israel, Tamar, weren't you? Australia,
Australia.
yeah. Okay, I was right. Okay. Because I came to Australia when I was 26 from Israel, and I was born in Russia. And when I came to Australia, which was just before the new millennium began, I very quickly found myself pretty much in the ivory tower of the academia and the literary world. So my perspective would be probably a little bit different. So I know that, and I'm married to a Jewish man like Tamar, who was born here, and my sort of, and it seems to me that Australian Jews, as Tamar said, do have used to really think of themselves as very kind of integrated, almost not like a minority. They always been, fighting for other minorities' rights. And also, I might be very presumptuous, but in my impression is that most of the Australian Jews who were born here, who I met, if they were from Ashkenazi origins, and most of them are from Ashkenazi, almost predominantly the Australian Jews are from Ashkenazi origins, they also think of themselves as white, which to me is a very interesting claim. I mean, now people are changing their mind and starting to more think about themselves as people of color, not just because of our, or as white passing, not because just of our DNA, but also in terms of how we are treated. But to me, because I came here quite late, I've always had an accent. I came from Israel, and but almost exclusively mixed in so-called progressive circles. And my politics have been, progressive, although now I am very seriously questioning the idea of what is progressive and what is digressive. But anyway, I've always kind of felt that I was with me or any other Jewish person really in those progressive circles, the cultural elite sort of Australia. We were always second-class citizens. And so for me, for example, to be accepted in Australian literary circles, which I have been for a long time until October 7, I had to downplay the fact that I was Israeli, and in fact, I did not need to downplay it. People around me downplayed the fact I was Israeli and totally focused on my Russian origins because Russia, of course, is much better on human rights, not. But so to me, what happened here after October 7 was not as surprise as it was to a lot of Jewish people around me who grew up here for a long time, because I think I was really aware of those microaggressions for a long time. And I mean, with this outbreak of anti-Semitism, the horrendous scale of it in Australia, yeah, I really did. I don't want to sound like Cassandra, the ancient prophetess, but yeah, I saw it coming, and I was trying to get to do what you guys are doing in America, which is amazing. There are artists against anti-Semitism. I was trying to get Jewish writers in Australia before October 7, way before October 7, to band together and advocate for our rights and say, no, we are not treated equally. But nobody was interested. Nobody thought we had a problem until now.
Hmm. You know, a lot of what you're talking about, I feel, and I had this feeling as I was reading through the book again too. Um, it's so familiar. I mean, I think that for instance, what you're talking about, your experiences in these progressive, or let's progressive spaces, is something that I think not just in the United States but elsewhere in the diaspora, that has been the experience of many Jews. And again, some of us may have seen this happening even before October 7th, but it's just become on a whole other level since then. But I'm also thinking back to our preparatory call that the three of us had for this, and I think it was you, Tamar, who talked about Australia as a particularist case, or like a kind of case study. Were there things that you thought that whether it's the whole world, the whole Jewish world, things that could be kind of extracted from or learned from this Australian Jewish experience after October 7th?
Yeah, I kind of see Australia as a little bit of a kind of the word in Hebrew is coming to me, not in English, a chamama, like
Oh,
glasshouse.
like a hothouse.
A hothouse, yeah. In terms of being a very small population, there are 25 million Australian citizens, and we make up 120,000 of the population, approximately, which is a really small part of the population. I think it's like 0.4% or something, if I'm not mistaken.
0.4, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what happened, and this was before Bondi, there was this sense that like what's happening in Australia, I couldn't understand why people didn't want to hear and understand, because I think what Bondi showed us is that the trajectory of how words and dehumanization and vilification can ultimately lead to violence. And so that felt like something that was such a salient message from the book, like where it could go. And then when Bondi happened, it just felt like very devastating that it took on this added dimension of evidence of how that has happened and how it actually tracks how words become violence and how institutionalized indifference, not just indifference of the silent majority, can enable a small group of people who are very loud and very virulent to have such impact over the whole population. And so in that sense, I really believe that the Australian story is something that can be learnt from and help understand these patterns of modern anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, how that how the legitimacy that's given to anti-Zionism as a system of thought or political critique can actually, really evolve into something so sinister. So I think Australia's story really gives a good case example of that, sadly.
Yeah.
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 But on the other hand, I should add that at the same time, what that created was like a press for action, which is interesting because as someone growing up in Australia, there's something, life was really good there. You never really had to fight for much, but all of a sudden we had no choice. And so that really created, like, there was a very strong wave of action. And I was involved in the women's led activations around the hostages, the silence of the around the sexual crimes of October 7. But everyone just like had to do something. And so that also is an incredible case study of Jewish mobilization and Jewish women's mobilization. So I'm going to give you that positive side too. Lee and I don't always look for the positive. We didn't want any, sweet endings in the book. It purposely told stories as they were and raw, but there is the other side of the stories, and that really is that story of resilience. And I think in that sense also, I'm very proud, perhaps not of where my country is at, but certainly of how the Jewish community and Jewish women specifically came together to raise their voices because they had no choice.
Can I just jump in here because to follow on what Tamara says, and because it occurred to me that we forgot to answer Erica's second part of the first question, which is how we showcase the diversity of stories in our book. So is that okay, Erica? I'll just briefly say a
Yes,
few
I was going to let
words.
it go, but that's okay. Go ahead. Go back.
So I'm not going to go on for long, but I just wanted to say that just as Tamar said, we wanted diversity in the book in many ways. So we didn't want to impose any falsely happy endings when there were none. And we were doing this book while this all was unfolding, and even before Bonda, it's still unfolding. But we did end up with some essays that talk more about the very strangely positive things that happen to people after October 7, like the community activation or like, more understanding clearly who you are as a Jew. That happened to me as well. And we wanted to show that even though our community is so small, as Tamar was saying, 0.4% of Australian population, and most of the Jewish people here are Ashkenazi. We wanted to show the readers how diverse we still are, even within these narrow parameters. So I know that when our event was beautifully advertised by in America here, you sort of put a lot of emphasis on how different the professions of all of women were in the book. But we also tried to aim for diversity in terms of regions because the stereotype goes that all Jews in Australia are kind of focused around Melbourne and Sydney, and yes, the majority is, but we also have regional contributors and people from the supposedly most isolated city on earth, which is Perth, etc. And we also wanted to seek stories of people who, who were here for generations and those who, like me, just came recently. And we have a Sephardic contributor. But another thing I'll just add to this is that one way in which Tamara and I shaped this book really worked on very hard on shaping this anthology is to avoid the malady that affects a lot of anthologies, especially on such sort of political topics, is that often essays would just repeat themselves. So we really worked so hard on making sure that each essay reflected some other different aspect of the changes in people's lives, be this parenting. So we only had one essay on parenting, which is Tamara's essay, or an essay about find coping with what happened through in a quiet way through cooking. And so Tamara and I, during the editing process, found ourselves in this, just doing this really, I must say, absurd sounding conversations with our contributors. We would say things like, do you mind not mentioning your grandmother who went through Holocaust because we already have a lot of grandmothers in the book? And that sounds terrible, but it really was important to make sure that especially non-Jewish readers who many of them I suspect never met a Jew even because there's so few of us. We really wanted to go beyond the stereotypes, and even though we know the diversity of our community, we really wanted that by reading our essays, people would not come out of this and say, "Oh, all these rich Jews or all these whatever Jews."
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I was, as I was rereading it, I was thinking about even other ways that you have one teenager. I think she was 15 when she wrote her essay. And then clearly there are some sort of older grandmothers in the mix. I mean, you have all sorts of diversity. I'm glad you mentioned the geographical diversity too. Where is Northern Rivers? I couldn't figure out where that is. Well, I thought that was what you were going to say. That was the most remote place, because that was a place I had never heard of. But in any case, yeah. And the other thing I'll just say, and this is something from my I'll take on my teaching hat. I often tell my undergraduates when they have a reading assignment, do not skip the introduction or do not skip the foreword, because I think they're very eager to get to the meat of the assignment and they sort of hurry forward. And I'm going to say the same thing to anybody here who has not yet read the book. Do not skip the introduction by our co-editors on the screen, because it really does help map out, some of what they've just been speaking about now, and even more, and help situate you, I think, more firmly in the geography of the book. Tamar, you brought up the specific issue of women's reactions, Jewish women's reactions in Australia to this, and that kind of leads into something I really wanted to talk about, which is the gender dimension of the book. You had, I think, well, I'm not sure which one of you said this again in our earlier conversation, but you sort of talked about this book as a project powered by sisterhood, and it occurred to me that clearly there's the sisterhood of the contributors themselves, all of these Australian Jewish women writers. But I also, again, in reading, was struck by the real strong, the visceral sense of sisterhood that so many of them expressed. Again, something I feel is common for all of us in the diaspora with our Israeli sisters. And in particular, there's so many references to female hostages. There's one, again, I mean, you don't have so many happy endings, as you said, but there's a moment in one of the essays where one of the writers talks about being able to feel she can celebrate her birthday because a couple of the female hostages are being released that day, right? So I was just wondering, there's so many elements of gender to October 7th and the aftermath and this book, and I'm just wondering which sort of speak most profoundly or perhaps loudly to each of you, for this audience again of JWI and AAA together.
So it's interesting, you just earlier you referenced International Women's Day, and actually it's exactly 2 years since the idea for this book came about, because in Australia there was a very gendered element to the local strain of anti-Semitism that emerged at the beginning, with the cadre of so-called feminist influencers who did everything they could to really diminish from, and they couldn't really figure out whether they were going to deny or diminish or totally discredit what happened on October 7, but they were very, very vicious, and they went after prominent Jewish businesswomen on social media. That was definitely our first front, and then that eventually culminated in the doxing of the WhatsApp group that Lee was involved, that founded and established, and so the local strain for me that I recognized earliest was this very female on female hate. And so whereas the book emerged from the initial activism of October 7 and the silence around the sexual crimes of that day, as we got closer to International Women's Day and the doxing was happening and these feminists were getting airtime, not just on social media, but also on the stage for International Women's Day, which, by the way, is happening this year again. They have been given the stage again. at various International Women's Day events. That for us made us realize at the time that local Jewish women were feeling so demoralized, and we really wanted to give them a way to reclaim their voices and take, and have a chance to tell their stories. And that's how the whole project actually started. It was a community-wide project. We attracted close to 160 essays from women across Australia, and then all those essays have been submitted as an unpublished manuscript to the October 7 archive at the National Library of Israel. But that was one goal of the project. And the other goal of the project was to create this book. So when I said that it was like activated by the sisterhood, I really feel very strongly that these are 36 stories of very brave women who, by the way, when we published this book and when we were creating the book, it was dangerous. I mean, to put your name out there, it was an act of true, faith in who they were, and an act of true resistance, if we want to borrow from the terms of this event, to put their names to it, because there was a lot of fear. And so that whole process, while we have those 36 stories, which are powerful on the page, there is just so much energy of that sisterhood that went into this book. Whether it was just the general activism that was happening in so many different groups, or the fact that the book was fully funded by women in the community, had this whole tranche of essays that, while they didn't make it into the book, they exist and they are preserved. And that is when, for me, this feels like before October 7, I didn't think I needed to care about the fact that I was a feminist anymore, or Jewish, to be honest. I thought those things are givens to me. And this book for me really threw me back into that world of no, I'm a woman, I'm a Jewish woman, and I need to speak up and I need to help other people do that. And so that is, for me, that was why it was so important to keep that gendered lens on the book as well.
Thank you. Lee, do you have anything? I mean, I'm wondering, we've referred a little bit to the doxing, which I know that story. Perhaps you can just sort of familiarize the audience with it. And I mean, as Tamara was speaking, I was wondering if you feel that there was sort of a gendered, what was directed towards you. Do you think part of that was also, a matter of gender, not just your Jewishness? But you perhaps just explain briefly what we're talking about when we talk about the doxing.
So I would love to, but the two quick things I just want to say with racing in my head at the moment. Just one more gender dimension that we wanted to capture in the book, and I know for Tamara it was very important, just as it was for me, is that just after October 7, our Jewish organizations here were quite slow to respond to what was going on, the outbreak of anti-Semitism. They were a bit on the back foot, sort of reacting rather than kind of proactive, I would say. And I'm not saying it's now like this, but that's how it was at the start. And so a lot of grassroots activism sprang here in Australia. I wonder if it's the same in America. And almost there, see, yeah. So as Tamara said, it is a reflection of what's going on. And a lot of this grassroots activism was actually spearheaded and carried out by women, all this unpaid labor, in addition to caring for the emotions of the children, often husbands. And, Tamara is a really great example. She got activated. I mean, I got activated in another way by founding that WhatsApp group. But before I talk about doxing, that's the other thought I had. I just think Tamara kind of was downplaying the fact that she's actually came up with this idea of doing Raptured, and the gender dimension of it, but it will be just by women. But Tamar, it came out of such an interesting story, which directly relates to International Women's Day. I wonder if before I talk about doxing, you would like to share that story of, filming crew and
Oh,
it's a
yes.
good story.
Yeah, basically what we decided when a group of us got together and discussed what we were going to do for International Women's Day, it seemed like we were going to do a continuation of this event that we held in December to call out UN Women in Australia. That was very successful and very galvanizing for the women of the community, and a recognition that they could actually turn up on the streets, move away from their keyboards and turn up on the streets and make a difference. And so we were planning a continuation of that for International Women's Day, and we realized that we needed to do something for the local women, not just to advocate for Israel, but to advocate for themselves. So we were going to the whole idea started with a video that we wanted to create about Jewish women's contributions to Australia, what it means to be Jewish, a Jewish woman in 2024, March 2024. And so everything was set up to go. And then the night before, we had a production house offer their services pro bono. And then the night before the shooting, the photo shoot, we got a phone call to say that they'd pulled out because some of their crew members had decided that it was too political for them. So that's actually how the whole thing started. Yeah, sometimes I forget that story,
Really?
but that is actually where, and that was, for us, we pivoted the project. We created we didn't do a full video in the end. We didn't do exactly what we wanted, but we were like, by hook or by crook, our voices are going to be heard. And so we created a social media platform, and then the anthology project came out of that because we realized that it wasn't
Wow.
our imagination and it wasn't us being precious. Like there was one politician at some time said, "Oh, when's in Australia?" This guy said, "I just wish the Jewish community would grow up already and stop whining," something like that. Someone who used to be very normal, but he's not anymore. Anyway,
Who is
and
that?
Mark Latham. Yeah.
Oh,
Anyway, so he did say that, and I just think to myself, no, we were never imagining it. Like it was always
Hmm.
real and our voices. And today we actually have had a very positive reception for the book. We have not had to deal with a lot of antagonism, but certainly if you go to some pages on social media, there's our crybaby
of
anti-Semitism,
feminists,
poor white women,
of
centering
feminists,
themselves.
yeah.
Yeah, by feminists, always by feminists. Yeah. So
But it's really fascinating to hear how an attempt to really shut you
sabotage.
down and shut your voices down sort of made you come back even more strongly. And here you are tonight, talking more about this story. So thank you, Lee, for prompting Tamar to say that. And then just quickly, just so everyone is sort of up to speed on what you went through. And I know that for a while you kind of you retreated a little bit because I follow you on social media, and it even quieted you what you went through with that doxing thing a little bit. Now you're back, here you are. But why don't you just sort of tell everybody just a little about it?
Thank you, Erica, and also thank you for your ongoing support. Yeah, look, it's very hard to talk briefly about doxing, but I'll do it because it's a big story. It's a big story that actually changed Australian legislation as well. Who would have known? But I'll just try to tell a very fast version. So here I was on 30th of October, sitting in my car with a shopping bag with smelly spring onions in it. And I look at my phone, and there's a message from my friend who is not Jewish. He's a very smart historian, very supportive, saying to me, "Lee, did you see the latest letter of Overland, which is a very left-wing, very progressive literary journal?" He said it's disgusting. Anyway, I opened the letter and I see that it was just literally it was just like not very before Israel even retaliated, after October 7. There's an open letter with about 1,000 signatures, a lot of them of my literary peers saying how basically Israel is to blame for October 7. They're the aggressors, they're the occupiers, and all that sort of stuff before even any retaliation. So and what preceded that letter was silence on socials. Privately, people would check with me, knowing I'm Israeli. A lot of literary people would check with me how I was, but no public, posts or anything about what happened to people in Israel on the 7th of October. So to cut the story very short, I took my shopping bag of spring onions, went home, and I thought either I'm going to get really depressed now or I'm going to do something about it. So I first of all organized an open letter from Jewish creatives and our allies to basically the arts generally, not just to that Overland magazine, to say like how we're calling you out for your silence. And it gained a lot of signatures and media and to organize that letter more efficiently, I opened WhatsApp group. I never even knew what WhatsApp was before that time. And very quickly, and I thought, well, if I'm already opening a WhatsApp group to gather those signatures, may as well just offer people support for, because and I decided to, after consultation with some people, I decided to offer this group as a support group for both creatives but also academics, because in universities and arts it's where we, as as in America, we've been most harassed and excluded. So I thought if I'll get 50 people for this group, that'll be wonderful, and we'll do things together. But I got very quickly over 600 people. And we were going really well for about 3 or 4 months, offering each other support until we got doxxed. I'm not going to go into the specifics of how that
Yeah.
happened, but what I'll say is that that doxing was absolutely earth-shattering for so many of us, including myself. People were harassed, death threats. I didn't receive myself death threats, but I was very quickly started being excluded from different in literary institutions with which I was affiliated for many, many years, I went very quickly. I mean, it started from October 7, but after the doxing specifically, which was in January 2024, I went very quickly from being the kind of darling of the literary world, because I maybe not a best-selling author, but I am really known among writers as the mentor and teacher. I've been around for a very long time. I launched so many books. I endorsed so many books. People endorsed me and whatever. So I went very quickly from being a darling of the literary world to being somebody who my friends got calls about going, is Liam Mossad agent, stuff like that. One of my friends said, she's not fit enough. But anyway, but to be a Mossad agent. But for a lot of people, it's been really much, much even worse than for me. I mean, livelihoods were lost, and it's been like a real witch hunt. In Australia changed legislation because of this, because so many of us were really viciously doxxed, and some of our doxers, like a woman who you may have heard in America about, Randa Abdel Fattah, who made big waves around, the festival cancellation
The
here.
Adelaide Festival. Yep.
Yeah, she's still going strong and has a lot of support.
Yep.
But the doxing in in some small but persistent ways continues to this day for some of us. Just a few days ago, I had the big honor, Tamara knows about that, of having made a 8-minute raving video by one of Australia's most prominent feminists, who is now been very sort of disgraced, basically. But it was a feminist going on a video saying that I have perverse sexual fantasies because I wrote an article about the sexual violence of October 7, and I gave some details. So she says that these rapes never happened, but I have a very perverse imagination, and clearly I'm getting off fantasies of sexual rape. That's
All right. So I think everyone now has a sense of some of what you have been through. I just want to encourage the audience to feel free to put questions. We're going to move shortly to questions for Lee and Tamar. So if you have questions, to put them into the chat. We will be moving through those as many.
You've disabled the chat. The chat is disabled.
Okay, so I'm going to ask our tech people with JWA to handle that. JWI,
and while we're
I'm sorry.
handling it.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. All right. So I thought maybe sort of like wind toward the close of this part of the program with something that, again, we chatted about briefly. You brought it up in our planning call, which was the idea of the book and the contributors as ambassadors. Sort of these writers are sort of ambassadors for the articulation of Jewish experiences and stories. And then you also, I think, had some thoughts about the roles that readers can play, Jewish readers and non-Jewish readers. But what roles can readers of any book really sort of play in trying to, make the world a better place, and readers of this book in particular, which hopefully everybody will be at some point shortly if they haven't become a reader already.
I think that for us, the reader for us is well, we've got two groups of readers really. We have our Jewish readers, and we've had amazing feedback from people who feel like represented and seen on the page and have actually, used the book to amplify their own experiences and share the broader collective experiences as well. And so the reader also becomes an ambassador in that sense. A lot of people have said to us, I read the book and then I went out and I bought another 5 copies and I gave it to people who I couldn't have these conversations with. And then we have the non-Jewish readers, and for them, we see the book as a bridge, a way to repair the rupture, a way to reach out and say, we want to balance the needle on the misrepresentation that's happened. We want you to understand our side, or not, I don't like to talk about sides, but we want you to understand our stories and our experiences. And we have also had feedback from readers who feel like the book has been able to illuminate some of their blind spots, and help them better understand some of the terms that are thrown around, whether it's anti-Semitism, which is like this big concept that's so, spoken about, but, a lot of people just don't understand what it means on a daily level. But also gives them a way to also reflect on their own prejudices and how they might have been influencing the way they've interacted with this issue of the conflict and how it's played out in Australia. And so those readers also become our ambassadors. We have this a few people who have said to us that they've given their books to copies of the book to people in their personal circles. And I know I'm thinking of one gentleman who has found it really instructive, and he's lost relationships with people in his own circles. He's like a Catholic guy from Queensland, and he's lost relationships because he's tried to say, just listen to the stories and think about them. No one's asking you to change politics. And really, we're not. Don't change your politics, but open your hearts, open your minds. So where we've been able to have that impact, it's been really profound because that's what we set out to do. If we can get the book out, we feel the book is telling 36 stories, but it really is hopefully a voice for so many more. And so that's really where we see the reader being a partner in the process, not just a passive reader.
And really, as Tamar was saying, for us, the book is, we hope it's a conversation opener. It's an opener for difficult conversation that we often try to avoid. And so, to your wonderful question, Erica, what readers can do, I would add to what Tamar already said. Posting about our book would be fantastic, not to promote us, we're not profiting from this book, but posting it to start conversations, to maybe quote that resonated with the reader, and to sort of discuss it like this. I know of quite a few readers, including my mother-in-law, who are in book clubs, and they non-Jewish, so Jewish readers who are in non-Jewish mixed, book clubs. So, like my mother-in-law, who is in this Italian club, she said, "Let's have all the other women that are somehow connected to Italy." She said, let's do next time Ruptured and let's discuss it together. And that's what they did. So the more you can kind of start conversations with the book, the more we'll feel we actually, it was worth for, this whole project has been worth for us. But also, if any readers know people who are leaders of some sort, so key thinkers, and you can give them this book, it will be amazing. So we already in Australia, with help of generous donors, we distributed this book to all the universities, to their leaders, to most of the arts organizations, and to some of the politicians as well, including our Prime Minister. I don't know whether they
Yeah,
read it, I don't know, but we
yes.
gave it to them.
That actually leads into a question here that's just come in. Someone's wondering, I'm struggling with the idea of actually getting people to want to read this book after knowing what it's about. Any suggestions do you have that you might have for encouraging already closed-minded people to read?
Yes, I would suggest yes. If the person is close-minded because they're a progressive person who learn the Jews equal bad oppressors and etc., just speak their language. Just say to them, if I was giving you a book of any other minority, wouldn't you want to hear their own voices? Just use the terminology, which is kind of, that's what I do in progressive circles. Say, I always emphasize when I pitch our book to writers' festivals or whatever, I always say very in bold, own voices. Listen to own voices.
That's very helpful.
And
Yeah.
I think also assuring people that the book is not about taking sides, it's not about changing like political orientations. The idea of sharing lived experience is what makes storytelling so powerful. And storytelling is something that we can all share, even if we don't share the same opinions. And so being able to, humanize through reading the stories is also something that, hopefully can appeal to some people. I mean, I think for us, we know that there are people who are just never going to want to read the book and never going to be interested. And really, who we're trying to get to are the people in the middle, the people who are still open to being, to opening their hearts. We are very, we don't engage with people or big issues where we know that the person on the other side, such as someone who was mentioned earlier in the Adelaide Literary Festival, like we're not going to win those people over, but we can create conversations with the people in the middle. And I think that that's the power, part of the power of the book is that we have been so humbled to hear from people who actually might have been considered silent majority until now, that we realize actually may have just been very lacking in confidence about what was going on and how to address it and how to talk about it. So hopefully the book helps translate some of these issues for them so they can have a stance.
And I think there's also, again, once you read it, I'm just going to go back to the importance of this introduction because something that you just referred to very briefly about politics. You talked about in the introduction a choice that you made about voices that are not included here, right? You wrote there are, however, voices that are not included here. Those that deny Palestinians their rights and those that deny Israel's right to exist. So there may be some preconceptions about what is or is not in the book, and I think people may be surprised, that this is not, this is not a book. This is not a book about hate or revenge or anything like that. If that's what people might be, people on the outside might be wondering if that's, what if that's any part of their resistance to reading it. So I just want to put that out there right away again in case people haven't yet read the book or read the introduction. Remember, read the introduction. So here's a question. I'm curious if there was one essay submission that really surprised Tamar and Lee, something they didn't expect or hadn't anticipated that really moved them.
Can I take this one,
Yeah,
Tamal?
please do. Yeah.
Maybe you probably have another surprise, but I think it was both me and Tamar. We basically, that's an easy one. We basically advertised this book as, for adults, for 18 plus to, and then our youngest contributor snuck in an essay and we read it both and we're like, this is really, about being young, being queer and what it's like for her and trying to reconcile being Jewish in queer spaces. And so, and we both read it and we went, well, it's not kind of what we asked for, but it's a really great essay. Let's put it in.
It is. It's a great essay. So you didn't expect to get under
No, we
18s
asked
in
for
this
only
book.
adult women. It was specifically
Oh,
the
okay.
requirement, but she was very cheeky and it paid off for her, for her and for us.
Hineni. She's a Hineni person, right?
Definitely is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, can I just quickly say, sorry, this is not about the questions, but just very fast. You mentioned something beautiful earlier on about, how the topic of this year is Hineni, and there's a lot of Hineni in our book, and Hineni is traditionally, of course, in our cultures about survival. But I think for me, and maybe for Tamar as well, the motive of Hineni was not so much just about survival, but more so about defiance. You excluded us from public spaces, but Hineni, here I come.
Yeah.
Oh, that may be an absolutely fantastic note for us to conclude on this part of there. But don't go anywhere because I believe that Hannah will be coming back with a final segment for us.
I am. I'm here, Hineni.
Hmm.
Thank you, thank you, thank you to Erica and Lee and Tamar and to everyone for being here and spending the evening with us. We are grateful for our partnership. We're grateful for the opportunity to center Jewish stories and storytelling and to engage in this conversation together. I'm going to put in the chat if you'd like to connect directly with our speakers. please feel free to reach out. They have graciously offered their contact information, and we encourage you to stay in touch and continue this conversation by keeping up with our upcoming events from Read with JWI and Artists Against Anti-Semitism, as well as the work of our authors, of course. JWI is so proud to bring together conversations like this that recognize and amplify the important work of Jewish writers and storytellers. And if tonight's event resonated with you, I encourage you to consider supporting the work that makes meaningful programs like this possible. I'm going to paste a couple links in the chat for JWI and the Artists Against Anti-Semitism. And with that, our event has concluded. Thank you again for being here, and I wish you all a good night or a good rest of your day, depending on where you are in the world.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.